Welcome to the Coaching to Distinction webinar. In this webinar, I'm going to talk you through how to achieve a distinction in your Level 5 coaching apprenticeship. So the objective of today's session is to understand how to achieve a distinction for all three components of the apprenticeship. And as you hopefully already know, the components for your endpoint assessment are made up of three different elements. We've got the knowledge test, the professional discussion, in which you'll present your portfolio and be asked some questions around that. And then you've got your 2 one-hour coaching observations with a Q&A at the end of the second one. So just to be clear, to achieve a distinction, you will need to achieve a distinction in all three elements of the EPA. So if you were to score a distinction in the observation and the knowledge test but not the interview, it would still be a pass. So I'm going to talk you through how to achieve a distinction in all three of those components. So first of all, the knowledge test. So the knowledge test is quite straightforward in terms of how to achieve a distinction. It's a clear-cut 35 out of 40. That you need to achieve on that for a distinction. So you need to be able to make sure, if you want a distinction in the knowledge test, that your knowledge is on point. And some of the ways that you can do that are by revising all the knowledge from the booklet as thoroughly as possible, focusing on your gaps when you get questions wrong, planning daily bite-sized revision sessions to avoid cognitive overload, and ensure that you're consistently achieving 35 or more on the knowledge tests. If you are, then it's likely you will get a distinction. So you've got mocks 1, 2, 3 and 4 to practice, but also I have provided some extra mocks. When you register for your endpoint assessment, the exam board NQual will send you some practice ones as well to do on their system. So remember, for the knowledge test, flashcards, questions on one side, answers on the other might help. Creating your own quizzes, cloze activities, multiple choice questions, as well as completing the mock tests. Peer quizzing with another learner if you prefer that interactive element to revision. And creating mnemonics for certain coaching models, if that helps. Whatever you do, it needs to go beyond merely reading the pages of the revision booklet. I think that works for a very small percentage of people, so we need to be doing things that go beyond just reading the pages over and over again. So that's the knowledge test, which I've briefly gone through because there's not much else I can sort of direct you to in terms of how to achieve the distinction. But for the professional discussion, there is a bit more nuance around how to achieve a distinction. So for the professional discussion, as you can see, there's pass criteria for all of these KSBs, but there's only distinction criteria for K9, S4 and S5, and B3. So there's 4 criteria there that have distinction attached to it. So if you meet that criteria for those 4 knowledge, skills and behaviours, you will achieve a distinction. So I'm going to go through each one now. Now the first one is explaining how you've contributed to organisational effectiveness and strategic aims through coaching others. So to get a distinction here, you need to know what your strategic aims, or let's call them organisational goals, are. So what are your organisational goals? If you can't articulate them, then you won't be able to score a distinction. So that might be something along the lines of my organisational goal is to retain staff at 80% across the next year. your goals will all be quite different. And what you need to be able to do then is link what's happened in your coaching, so the impact of your coaching, to that. So I'll give you an example. It might be, in one of my testimonials, one of my coachees has said that they wanted to leave and they now, thanks to coaching, feel more supported and see a future in the business. It might not be as explicit as that. It might be just a case of the well-being of our coachees has clearly improved due to some of the things they're writing in their testimonials or their evaluations, such as I feel more supported, I feel more clear-minded in what I'm doing, I feel more organised. Any kind of benefits that you think you could link to well-being would help there. So the distinction criteria basically is asking you to describe the relationship between the impact of your coaching and how that feeds into your organisational goals. And just to be clear there, your reference point for that is Masterclass 7. So if you've not attended Masterclass 7 yet, don't worry, we'll cover that in Masterclass 7. And in Masterclass 7, we talk about return on investment. So reread the slides, rewatch that Masterclass, and refer to your ROI assignment, which involves you making a PowerPoint, a slide deck of how you've impacted the organisational goals. That will suffice for that criteria. The next criteria is S4, 5 and 3. So let's look at S4 and 5. Evaluating the systemic outcomes of the coaching session to ensure that it meets the desired outcomes of a range of stakeholders. So what we need to do here is we need to go, right, what were some of the outcomes of the coaching sessions that I conducted? So you need to be able to say, you know, some of the outcomes my coachees were setting were to generate more business, or some of the outcomes they were setting were to plan a new scheme of work, or some of the outcomes were to overcome some limiting beliefs around a certain topic. Great, so you're able to describe the outcomes of the coaching session, but now we need to be able to evaluate the systemic outcomes of the coaching session. So how do those outcomes relate to organisational goals, so systemic outcomes? So because my coachees were focusing on how to generate more business, this meant that the organisation was performing better and KPIs were met. So KPIs were met, performance improved. It might not be as tangible as that. It might be more to do with like the softer skills, like my coachees wanted to focus on overcoming limiting beliefs, and that created a more cohesive workplace because they were able to build better relationships with their team members. There was more synergy in the group as a result. So what we're trying to do here is think, what were the outcomes of the coaching sessions that I conducted, and how can I link those to the systemic outcomes? And what we want to be able to do here is talk about the knock-on effects on the value chain. So that means talking about not just the coachee, but how else did the coachee's work impact other stakeholders? So that might be senior stakeholders, it might be the coachee's team members, it might be the coachee's clients, customers, whatever you define as clients or customers, students. So we need to be talking about, and this had a knock-on effect on other people apart from the coachee, and evidencing examples of that. In this part as well, you also need to be able to give an example of how how you've recontracted. So you need to be able to say at one point, we recontracted as a coachee or with the sponsor or both. And the reason we did that was because we initially agreed to focus on improving performance around teaching and learning, or improving performance around generating sales. But actually, as I started to explore this with the coachee wanted to talk more about their time management and how they're managing their sleep, because they felt that this was a real blocker in the way they showed up at work. So although it might feed into the overall contract, the topic's slightly different. So you might want to then just recontract with the coachee and say, I feel like we're moving on to a different topic. How is this feeding into the topic that we initially agreed on, or is it something separate? It might feed into the topic, so you don't need to recontract with the sponsor, but it might be something completely different. You've had to recontract, and then you have to contact the manager of the coachee or the sponsor. So we need an example of how you've recontracted, and that is necessary for the distinction criteria. Now the challenge there is if you haven't recontracted, then there still needs to be some kind of example of your awareness of recontracting, and what models you've got, what mechanisms you've got in place if and when that needs to happen. And if you've not had to, talk about the effective mechanism that you implemented from the start that meant that you didn't. But it's highly likely that most apprentices will have had to recontract it at some point. And then we've got B3. So B3 is quite methodical. You need one example of a professional development activity that was less effective. So an example someone gave me recently was, I really found watching the demonstration of master coaches, the master coach demonstrations really effective. It was really great to see master coaches in practice. But then I went away and I tried some of the techniques that they use and it fell flat, and it's because it wasn't authentic to me. So that wasn't as effective in the end as I thought. Okay then, what was effective? Give an example of a personal development activity then that was more effective. So that might be, I actually found watching back my own coaching sessions more useful, because I was able to pick out things that I was doing that I didn't think were effective and adapt them in a way that was more authentic to me rather than copying someone else. So you really need to give two examples there, one that was effective and one that wasn't, and justify why. So the coaching portfolio is assessed through those criteria. The observation has slightly more. So you can see here the observation has distinction criteria for the K12, S10, S12, S7, S8 and 9, S2 and 15. So let's have a look at K12, S10 and S12. So this is basically around models and techniques, like what coaching models and techniques are you using, and can you justify for the 2 sessions why you did what you did. So you need to be able to talk about both sessions, session 1, session 2, talk about what models you used or techniques and the impact. So I used grow because with the first person, and I stuck to grow because I felt like that the options part really helped them to develop their autonomy and come up with their own ideas, which I feel is something that this particular coaching needed. I used the space model in the second one because the scenario is slightly different. It was based more around performance anxiety, and that is why I went for that model. But then you need to be able to say, however, EBI, even better if, next time I probably would have incorporated some more moments of silence around the options. I felt like I rushed that a little bit, and if I incorporated some silence, I might have given them some more time for food for thought moments, and I didn't think that happened. So essentially here, what worked, what didn't, and if something didn't work, then we want some examples of what you'd do next time better. S7, right, S7 is a difficult one to get your head around in the respect that it's not as tangible as the others. The only difference really is, for this one, you've got to use your intuition to deliver feedback in a non-directive, non-judgmental way, which is what the pass criteria is, right? But the new word here is intuition. So what the assessor wants to see is that it's more natural. You're not just shoehorning in feedback to signpost the assessor that you can do that. It comes at more organic moments and it brings out genuine new insight. You can see the coachees, like light bulb moments come on because you're so in tune with the shift in the energy. You're noticing things at pertinent points in the session, and you're doing this consistently across both observations. It's not just something they're seeing you do once in one observation and once in another. They're seeing you do it more naturally. So the real way to meet that criteria is to practice that in your coaching sessions so it becomes more natural. And the next criteria is around questioning. So for this criteria, this part here is probably more observable. So by that I mean the assessor can probably see you use advanced questioning such as funneling, framing and probing. So with advanced questioning, it is more observable. An assessor will be able to see you funneling, probing, framing. So with this one in particular, it might not be that you need to explain how you funneled because they can see it, but what you do need to know is what funneling, framing and probing is. So I'd advise you, if you're unsure on that one, to revisit Master Class 2 slides for that one. And what they will want to see on this one is you justifying your questioning techniques. So they'll want you to explain why you funneled or probed, so why you use certain techniques at certain times. So I thought it was appropriate to probe a little bit at this point in my coaching session because I sensed that there was some beliefs and values that needed probing a little more in order for the coachee to gain insights. And I did this by, so you give your example, and the insight that was brought about was this. So here I would structure this as justify, exemplify, and then headline the insight that was brought about. And then the next criteria for your observation is the ability to contrast your two sessions. So you need to be able to say how your personal values affected each session. So you need to be able to explain what your values are. So these are just your personal values. So it could be something like, I really place a lot of importance on well-being, I really value respect, hard work, whatever they are. Remember, the assessor can't see what's going on in your head. So you need to be able to say at some point in the session, my personal values came up internally because the coachee said this and I felt this. And then you need to explain how you managed it, because it's likely that you maybe withheld that value, or you were about to lead and you stopped yourself. So tell the assessor, what I wanted to say internally was this, but I managed that because I know that the coaching values that I'm supposed to embody are non-directiveness. So you need to be able to articulate those. Non-judgmentalism, unconditional positive regard, the ability to manage bias. So you need to be able to talk about what the coaching values are and how your personal values conflicted with those in the session and what you did to manage it. And then you also need to talk about, okay, so what are you going to do differently next time? How will this inform future sessions? So that could be examples like, I'm going to seek coaching supervision because I know supervision is a tool that coaches use to help them attune more to their bias. I'm going to seek coaching mentoring. I'm going to continue with reflective practice such as journaling. I'm going to come up with some key STEM questions or phrases that I could go to instead of the more biased opinion sharing ones that sometimes I default to. So you need a sort of a takeaway for that. So, how to prepare for your coaching observation distinction. Ensure you revise the past criteria and meet this in your two observations, so you can focus on the distinction in your Q&A, because if you don't meet the past criteria, they'll use the Q&A to try and get you to meet that criteria. So we want to just demonstrate all the past in the observation so they can really drill into the distinction in the Q&A. Remember, you've got a webinar on that. Thoroughly, when I say on that, I mean on the past criteria. Thoroughly revise and prepare some stock answers that you could adapt on the day to the Q&A. And the third one is to get some, I know that's hidden there, but it says get some coaching practice in so you can practice the more advanced coaching skills. I must say the distinction apprentices are the ones that have practiced between 20 and 40 hours across the year. If you're not practicing the coaching, it's really quite difficult to meet that distinction criteria. So get the practice in. So have a think about what you've learned in this session, write down some key takeaways, and if there's anything you want to follow up on in terms of what I've covered today, get in touch with your skills coach and ask them some questions about what you want clarification around.